The desert doesn't forgive. It doesn't forget. And it never, not once in 1,000 years, takes sides. But on the night the sky turned the color of blood and the wolves went silent across the canyon, something happened between a lone cowboy and the daughter of the most feared Apache chief in the Arizona Territory that would be spoken of in whispers for generations to come. This is not a story about war. This is not a story about land or gold or power. This is a story about two souls standing at the edge of everything and choosing something the world told them they never could. His name was Cole Mercer. He was 31 years old, lean as a fence post, with hands so scarred from rope burns and barbed wire that the older ranch hands said he'd been born wearing gloves. He had eyes the color of storm clouds, gray with something darker hiding behind them, and a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in 3 weeks. He wasn't a hero. Heroes were for dime novels and church sermons. Cole Mercer was just a man who had survived things that should have killed him and who carried the weight of that survival the way a mule carries a pack. Without complaint, but never quite standing fully upright, he had ridden into the Sangre Canyon region 6 days ago on a commission from the territorial governor. A quiet job, a simple delivery of treaty papers to Fort Hadley, 60 miles south through Apache land. Simple, they said. Routine, they said. The kind of job a man could do in his sleep, they said. Those men had clearly never crossed through the canyon when the red dust storms rolled in from the east and turned the whole world into a blinding, burning wall of nothing. He had been 3 miles into the canyon when his horse threw a shoe, another mile in when the storm hit, and exactly 4 miles and 200 feet into the deepest part of Apache territory when the arrows began to strike the rocks around his feet. Not to kill him, to stop him. There is a difference, and Cole Mercer knew it. A warrior who wants you dead doesn't give you a warning. A warrior who wants you to stop gives you exactly 3 arrows, each one closer than the last. He stopped. They came out of the rock face like they were made of it. 7 Apache warriors, faces painted, rifles and bows at the ready, surrounding him in a perfect circle before he'd even had time to reach for his own weapon. Cole kept his hands visible, his breathing steady, his eyes moving slowly across each face. He had ridden through Apache land before. He knew the language of their silences. These men were not angry. They were afraid of something behind him. Then he heard it. A sound so wrong in that canyon that it made the hair on the back of his neck stand straight. A woman's voice crying out, not in Apache but in the broken, desperate English of someone who had learned it as a second language and was reaching for it now in a moment of pure terror. Please, someone. The rocks. I cannot. Cole turned his head toward the sound, and one of the warriors, the one with the most elaborate paint, the one with authority written in every line of his posture, gave a single, sharp command. 2 warriors peeled away from the circle and disappeared into the rock formations to the east. Cole waited. The remaining 5 kept their weapons trained on him, but their eyes kept cutting sideways, kept searching, and he realized with the slow, cold certainty of a man who reads situations the way other men read books. These warriors were not hunting him. They were looking for someone. Someone important. Someone they had lost in the storm. She appeared between 2 boulders as if the canyon itself had coughed her up. She was tall for a woman, with the kind of posture that comes not from pride but from expectation, the expectation that the world will look at you and judge, and that you will give it nothing to work with. Her hair was black as a crow's wing, loose and wild from the storm, tangled with red dust and small pieces of brush. She wore a dress that was part traditional Apache and part something else, something that spoke of a woman who existed between 2 worlds without fully belonging to either. There was blood on her forearm, a long shallow cut from the rocks, and she held it pressed against her side with a calm that people either born to suffering or trained hard by it recognized immediately. She was maybe 22 years old. She was the most self-contained human being Cole Mercer had ever seen in his life, and she was looking at him with eyes the color of dark amber. The kind of eyes that didn't ask for help so much as evaluate whether the help being offered was worth accepting. One of the warriors spoke to her rapidly in Apache. She answered, calm, measured, authoritative in a way that made the warriors around her visibly adjust their stances. Not in fear, in deference. Cole had spent enough time around men of rank to recognize what deference looked like in a body. These warriors weren't protecting a girl who had wandered off. They were protecting someone with power. She looked at Cole. "You are the courier?" she said. "It was not a question." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "My father's men found the governor's seal in your saddlebag before they found you," she said. "You carry the treaty papers." "I do?" "Then you know what those papers mean." "I know what they're supposed to mean," Cole said carefully. Something moved through her expression, a flicker of something between approval and exhaustion. "My name is Nizoni," she said. "My father is Chief Ahiga, and those treaty papers, Mr. Cowboy, are the only thing currently keeping my father's warriors from burning Fort Hadley to the ground." Cole looked at the warriors around him. He looked at the storm still churning at the canyon's edge. He looked at the rocky terrain ahead, the darkening sky, and the blood soaking through the cloth she pressed against her arm. "You need that wound cleaned," he said. "I need those papers delivered," she said. "Yes, ma'am. But you're going to bleed to death before I get there if we don't." "I am not going to bleed to death from a rock scratch," she said, with a sharpness that was almost funny. "I have survived worse before breakfast." He almost smiled. He caught it before it fully formed, but she saw it anyway, and something in her own expression shifted. Just slightly, just enough. That was how it began. The warriors escorted them both through the canyon. A strange, silent procession moving through the red dust and dying light. The cowboy and the chief's daughter walking 6 feet apart with the professional wariness of two people who had each learned, at great cost, not to trust easily. She moved through the terrain with the ease of someone who had grown up reading this land, the way he'd grown up reading cattle trails. She knew which rocks to step over and which to step on. She knew where the ground was solid and where it would give. She moved like water finding the path of least resistance, and Cole found himself watching her. Not the way a man watches a beautiful woman, though she was that, undeniably, but the way a craftsman watches another craftsman working, with a kind of involuntary professional respect. They made camp at a rock overhang as the storm's second wave hit the canyon. The warriors set up their own fire 15 yards away, close enough to protect, far enough to offer privacy that Cole understood was deliberate. Chief Ahiga's daughter traveling with a white courier was not nothing. It required a certain careful choreography of appearances. He cleaned her wound with whiskey from his flask and bandaged it with strips of his spare shirt. She sat perfectly still throughout, neither wincing nor performing bravery, just accepting necessary discomfort with the equanimity of someone who had long since made peace with the fact that the world was sometimes uncomfortable. "You're not what I expected," she said while he tied off the bandage. "What did you expect?" "Fear," she said simply. "Most couriers who ride into Apache land are afraid. They try to hide it, but fear has a smell." "I've been afraid plenty of times," Cole said, "but not now." He sat back and looked at her straight. "Should I be?" She considered that. "No," she said after a moment. "Not for my father's men. From the men at Fort Hadley." "Perhaps." He frowned. "What do you mean?" And then she told him. Slowly, precisely, with the controlled anger of someone reporting facts they wish were not facts, she laid out what she knew. The treaty papers he carried. The ones the governor had assured him were a gesture of peace. A formal recognition of Apache territorial rights to the southern canyon lands. Had been altered. She had seen the original document, she said. Her father's counsel had negotiated every word over 6 months of difficult, painful, careful conversation. The boundaries were specific. The language was clear. But someone between the governor's office and the courier's saddlebag had changed 3 key passages. 3 passages that, if signed by her father in good faith, would actually cede the heart of their winter grazing lands to a railroad company whose tracks would run directly through the canyon's center. Cole was quiet for a long time. "How do you know?" he said, finally. "Because I read English," she said, "and because I read the original. And because I have a very good memory?" She paused. "And because the man who altered the document made a mistake. He used a different ink. Not obvious, but visible if you know what you're looking at." Cole stared at the fire. "If your father signs those papers, he will sign them in good faith and lose everything," she said. "And when he realizes what happened, there will be no more talking. There will be only war. The weight of it settled over Cole like the stone ceiling of the canyon above them. "I need to take those papers back to the governor's office," he said. "Yes! That's 2 days hard riding in the opposite direction of Fort Hadley." "Yes! With a storm still moving through this canyon?" "Yes!" He looked at her. "Why are you telling me this? You could have had your father's warriors take the papers. You didn't need me." She met his gaze with those dark amber eyes, and he saw, for just a moment, what lived behind the composure. The absolute exhaustion of being the person who has to carry the truth when everyone around her would prefer the comfortable lie. "My father's warriors riding to the governor's office with stolen treaty papers will not look like justice," she said quietly. "It will look like war. A white courier returning with evidence of corruption. That is something a court can use. That is something a newspaper will print. I do not need Apache strength right now. I need someone the territorial courts will listen to." He understood. He pulled the treaty papers from his saddlebag that night, unrolled them by firelight, and looked, really looked, at the passages she indicated. She was right about the ink. The difference was subtle, but it was there, 2 shades of black, 2 different hands. He rolled them back up carefully. In the morning, they broke camp before dawn. The warriors saddled their horses. Cole loaded his own. The plan was clear. He would ride back north with the altered papers. She would return to her father's camp and tell him to delay the signing, and the warriors would escort them both to the canyon's north end before splitting off. It was a good plan. It fell apart at the north end of the canyon. 3 men were waiting there. Not soldiers. Not officials. Men on private horses with expensive rifles, and the particular look of people who had been paid very well to solve a specific problem. They had known about the courier. They had known about the route. And when they saw Nizani, Cole understood. They had also known about her and what she had discovered, and they had come to make sure neither of them made it back to the governor's office. What happened in the next 4 minutes was fast, brutal, and very loud. The warriors reacted instantly. Cole drew before any of the 3 men had fully raised their rifles. The canyon echoed with gunfire that sent birds screaming from the rocks 100 feet above. When it was over, and it was over quickly because the warriors were very good at their work. 2 of the 3 men had fled back into the rocks, and the third sat with his hands up and his hat on the ground, and all the color gone from his face. Cole stood with his gun still raised, breathing hard, and looked at the man. "Who sent you?" he said. The man told him. Cole had suspected, but hearing the name spoken aloud in a voice shaking with fear made it real and specific and prosecutable. He looked at Nizani. She was standing 6 feet to his left, a bow in her hands. She had taken it from one of the warriors without Cole even noticing, and her face was absolutely calm. "We have a witness," she said. "We do?" Cole said. He turned toward his horse. He packed the papers. He checked his ammunition. He did everything a man does when he is about to make a very long, very important ride, and then he started to mount up, and then he stopped. He stopped because something had shifted in the quality of the silence behind him, the particular silence that means someone is holding their breath. He turned around slowly. She was standing exactly where she had been. The bow was back with its owner. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was still composed, still controlled, still presenting that fortress of self-possession that she wore like armor. But something in her eyes, something she had not calculated or chosen, something that had simply escaped, told him that the woman who had said she could survive worse than a rock scratch before breakfast was, in this moment, very afraid of being left behind. Not in this canyon, not in this physical place, in the world she was trying to build. The world where the papers were corrected, and the treaty was real, and her father's people kept their land, and the railroad went somewhere else, and justice was a thing that actually happened, and not just a word in English that sounded beautiful and meant nothing. She was afraid that she would do all of this, find the truth, expose the lie, trust the courier, and that it would still not be enough, that the world would close back over it like water over a stone, that she would be left behind again, as she had been left behind before. Too Apache for the territorial courts, too English speaking for the old ones, too much of everything and not enough of anything to belong fully to either world. Cole Mercer was not a man of many words. He had made his living in silence and survived by keeping things simple. He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm going to need someone who speaks the language," he said. She blinked. "What language?" "The language of a man who altered an official treaty document and thought nobody would notice," Cole said. "The language of courtrooms and newspaper offices and governors' waiting rooms. I can get in the door. But I don't know enough words once I'm inside." A pause. "I know those words," she said. "I know you do," he said. "So are you coming or not?" It took her exactly 1 second. 1 second of whatever calculation she ran behind those amber eyes. Measuring risk, measuring distance, measuring the width of the gap between what was possible and what the world would allow. Then she walked to the nearest warrior's horse, said something in Apache that made the warrior nod immediately and step aside, and she mounted with the ease of someone who had been riding since before she could walk. She looked at Cole. He looked at her. "The governor's office," she said. "The governor's office," he said. They rode north together out of the canyon, the treaty papers rolled and sealed in Cole's saddlebag. The witness bound and slung over his own horse behind them, and the red dust of the Sangre Canyon rising in a long red banner behind them in the morning air. As if the desert itself, that ancient and impartial witness, had finally decided, just this once, to mark which way they had gone. The treaty was corrected. The railroad rerouted. The man who had altered the documents stood before a territorial judge before the first frost of that year, with a court reporter writing down every word, and a reporter from the Tosin Clarion filling 3 pages of notes in the gallery. The evidence was presented clearly, methodically, in 2 languages. Cole's plain, direct English and Nizani's precise, devastating command of legal terminology that made the defense attorney visibly pale. Chief Ahiga signed the real treaty on a Tuesday morning in October in the Fort Hadley conference room, with his daughter standing at his right side and a scarred, storm-worn courier standing at the back of the room with his hat in his hands. The chief signed his name and then looked up, across the room, and found Cole Mercer's eyes, and held them for a long moment. Cole didn't look away, neither did the chief. Then Ahiga nodded once, slowly. Cole nodded back. The desert doesn't forgive, it doesn't forget, and it never takes sides. But sometimes, on certain mornings when the light comes through the canyon in long gold bars, and the hawks ride the thermals up along the rim, and the world is very still and very old, it bears witness to the truth of things, to the courage it takes to carry it, to what happens when 2 people from opposite ends of everything that divides a world look at each other across the distance and decide, against all odds, against all history, against every voice that says it cannot be done, to cross it.